All right, everybody, let's get to it and pull that tarp. My guest today, Hollywood screenwriter Jason Keller. Welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, Jason.
It's good to be here. Nice to see you.
Jason, where I want to begin, how did you get into screenwriting?
Oh boy, that was a long time ago. Let's see. I was always interested in the film business. I grew up in Indiana. Grew up in Indianapolis, as far away from Hollywood as it seems you could be. But I was always really interested in the film business and movies and you know when I was a young man of 19, I struck out to Los Angeles, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that the entertainment business was something I was interested in. I knew I loved movies, and I came out here and I worked in any job that I could sort of get in the entertainment business. And all the while, as I was doing, all these sort of jobs, I kept being drawn to the screenplays that I would, the screenplays for the movies or the TV shows that I was working on as a crew member. I kept being very drawn to them and enjoyed reading them and would reread them and so I was drawn to that particular part of this business, the writing part of the business, and that's how I became a screenwriter, just by a sort of pull towards that craft and wanting to understand how it was done. And that's how I became a screenwriter over the span of, a decade plus that, that happened out here.
So, Jason, when you set out to LA, did you have friends, connections, any network in Los Angeles to receive you when you arrived?
No, I didn't. And it's an interesting question because no, the answer is no. I didn't. I had only been to the West Coast once when I was 11 or 12 or something on a 4 or 5 day vacation with my parents. I didn't know Los Angeles. I didn't know the West Coast. I didn't know anybody out here really. I didn't understand the entertainment business. I really just sort of packed up my, Toyota Corolla, and I just headed out. I mean, I really just struck out on this adventure, not knowing what I was going to find, not knowing if I was going to succeed or fail, and I think about that, often because, that was such a, for a young guy of 19 years old, completely naive, not sort of, someone who understood how the larger world worked at all. Really, it was a big step, and it was scary. It was scary as hell, and I'm glad I did that.
Was there a moment, maybe something small that happened, a little thing where you said, okay, maybe I can make it out here, where there was this big confidence boost and created some momentum?
Yeah, it was, Andrew, it was a rough decade. My first 10 years out here. I mean, there was nothing, it was exciting because I was young and I felt, sort of, unbreakable, as young people often do, and I was in a new city, and that was exciting, but it was a brutal 10 years. And the short answer is no. There was really very little in terms of encouraging signs for what I wanted to do. It was Andrew, it was pre-internet. It was pre the idea that stories and information were readily available, and so I was trying to break into a business that was not only closed to outsiders, but it was murky. It was beyond sort of complicated and puzzling. It was mysterious. And so God, it was a rough 10 years, and I had little success, but I was learning along the way, and I didn't give up, and it wasn't until and I was writing during that time, learning writing just because I was intrigued by it. Um, and then I won a fellowship, a writing fellowship. This is years and years and years after being out here and trying to write. I was invited to a writing fellowship that was a month long program in a different location, where this fellowship was going to pay for my flight, pay for me living for a month, and for a month I was going to work on a piece of my writing with other writers and professionals. And that was really the moment, to answer your question, you know, 8, 9, 10 years into, this journey that I was on, where I did get validation. I was hanging out with writers that were at a much higher level than me, and for the first time, I thought maybe I do belong here, and maybe I can do this.
Were you able to proceed from that point with that heightened degree of confidence? Did it help you?
It did. It did. I came out of that program. I made friends in that program. I had really met mentors for the first time in my sort of journey to become a writer. I met mentors, which is a huge part, I think, of a person's journey. You know what I mean? I think of Joseph Campbell, who you probably know. Um, his book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. I really see, my life and our lives as people as a hero's journey. You know what I mean? And along that journey and along my journey, I've sort of, there have been very important moments. And coming out of that program, I met mentors that were important to me, that were professional screenwriters, that offered me a job, literally, so I could make a little money while I pursued writing on my own, being an assistant or picking up phones at their production companies. And I was able to watch them work in close proximity, right? So I was able to see their process. And so that was the real boon that I got from that program. Is I met people who were excelling in the thing that I wanted to do, and I was allowed to be in the room and watch them do it. And so it blew open for me. The process of writing blew open for me. I found out, I had suspected it, but I found out that it wasn't some magical thing. It wasn't, it was just hard work. And I saw these guys that were very successful at it, working hard and grinding away at being high level writers. And so for me, to answer your question, it really changed my perception of what I was trying to do and how I should do it immensely, coming out of that program.
And Jason, I think that's one of the important things that people don't realize, right? They look at people in Hollywood and it looks glamorous.
Right.
Oh, it must
Yeah.
be fun to be a writer. It must be fun to be a producer, an actor, whatever it is that you're doing. But you use the word there, grind. It's a grind. It's a lot of work. And you've told me that it's really no different than any other business, whether you own a bakery, whether you write screenplays, whether you're the CEO of a business. It's a grind, and there's a lot of things that go into it. Take me a little bit behind the scenes to what a typical day in the life of Jason Keller looks like now. Now that you've achieved immense success, written some outstanding films, most recently Ford versus Ferrari, which was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. You've reached a pinnacle of success, but I want to know, what does a day look like for Jason Keller?
Right. I think coming out of that writing program, and then sort of stepping into the ability to see other writers work, and other writers I admired very much, and watching their process, I started to form my own sort of process or daily ritual, starting that, and it took me years, I think, to sort of refine it and try things out and realize they didn't work and stuff. But I've gotten to a place now where my day is, I look at, I listen to a lot of podcasts, I read a lot of books, about athletes, or people who are doing things that are physically impressive, right? Or you watch The Last Dance, the Netflix documentary about Michael Jordan, and you see what that guy goes through, what he went through to be the best at what he did. That sort of mindset I have fully adopted, this mindset that I read about. I'm not an athlete. I'm an athletic guy, but sports, sports is not my engine. I'm not driven to compete with others, but I'm a very active guy, and I really respond to those stories and those memoirs and those documentaries of athletes, because what I pull from those stories is mindset. That mindset is the thing, right? That enables a person to achieve something more, or to at least achieve more than their competitor, And so I've really adopted that in my writing. I see the creative, and this is just me. I don't pretend to understand the creative process of other artists. It's at its core, it's a very, singular personal thing. But for me, it's mindset, and it starts, for me, my day starts really the night before. I go to bed very early, and I wake up very early. So every morning I wake up at 4:30, 5 in the morning, 5 at the latest. And I immediately sit down at my computer and write. And I do that every single day. And my goal is to be able to get up and get straight to the creative process of writing without any other distractions. And that's so, and it's sometimes very hard to do, but I've just found that if I get up really, really early, I have 3 kids, I have a family, there's a lot of stuff going on in my life. If I get up at 4:30, 5 in the morning, I know that I can sort of slip into a space, into a zone, you know what I mean? Where for a couple hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, I'm only sort of engaged in that process of writing. So that's what my morning looks like. I do all these sort of things that really move me, that I read about athletes. I'm very rigorous with my, not eating in the morning. I drink, black coffee with a little bit of cream. I don't eat because I've just found that I'm able to get into sort of flow and creativity very quickly. And I work until, maybe I might write for 4 or 5 hours, ideally, in that time. And then I take a break, and I try and do something physical. I try and put some space between what I did in the morning and what I'm going to do in the afternoon. So I'll go for a run, or I'll go to the gym, or I'll, hike with the dog or something like that. And I'll just try and mix up my day. And then I have a second half of my day that basically what it is me thinking, preparing for the next morning's work. And so that's my day. And ideally, that's my day every day. And when I'm doing that, when I'm sort of unwaveringly repetitive in my day, in that way, is when I'm happiest creatively. It's when I'm most productive. It's when it's when I'm really feeling like I'm in flow with what I'm doing. So that's the thing I try and do. Now, I can't always do it because it's a busy world, and I have, other responsibilities, but that's more often than not a typical day. And that's the ideal day for me.
Jason, is there a difference between where you are in terms of the stage of development of a piece of work? Does it look a little different if you're in like an ideation mode versus in a polishing of some writing mode? How does that affect what you're doing?
It's a really good question. Yes, there are degrees of difference, between those steps. Um, you say the ideation mode. I call it daydreaming about a project, and that's that early stage where, maybe I've read a book that's interesting to me, or somebody's told me a story, or I've stumbled upon an article, or I've had an idea myself, and I'll spend days and weeks, if it's viable to me, if it bothers me enough, right? I'll spend days or weeks or months, thinking about it, daydreaming about it. I'll consciously sort of go into a room, creatively, in my mind, and I'll play with the idea, and I'll fantasize about what it could be, and yes, what the story is, but what does it look like? What does the world feel like? And I'll do that until I feel that I'm so sort of eager to start to materialize that in words, that I'll go to the next stage, and I find that there's really 3 or 4 stages, and the next stage would be, I sort of very loosely map out a story. I use index cards. It's very cliche, but it's very effective for me. I get it out of my head physically in the form of cards, on a big wall, and I'll sort of play with the sculpture and the architecture of that on a wall, and the music of it, sort of what it looks like and feels like. And then the third stage is I'll start to write, and it might take me, 3 months, 4 months to actually then put that into words. And then there's the polishing process, which is the last stage, where hopefully you have time to kind of put it away and do something else, and then go back to it with fresh eyes, and you do a rewrite. But I find that it's 4 steps for me, on any project, if I have the time. That's what I like to do.
When you're writing and you're in that flow state, as you described, are you giving yourself space in that moment to be critical of yourself and make adjustments, or are you just getting it all out?
Yeah, I'm getting it all out. You bring up I think, the struggle with the creative process. I mean, any process. I would assume an athlete at a high level is struggling with the critic in their mind. Do I belong in the majors? Am I good enough to run with, a gold medalist, or whatever that is? Certainly, I've found in the world of writing, I wrestle with a critic. I think I've maybe been able to manage that critic a little better. And one of the ways I do it is that if I'm in flow, and if I'm able to string many days together, and weeks, and hopefully months, of that perfect day of writing for me, I'm able to manage that critic by saying, I know this might not be good right now. I know that today's work might not yield something in the end, that is salvageable. Maybe not. I don't know. But I'm going to worry about that later. And so the sort of goal for me always is to understand that. And again, I would think that, and athletes feel this way too. You can have a good practice, you can have a bad practice. If you're a boxer, you can have a good day, in the ring practicing, or a bad day. But in the aggregate, the hope is that, at the end of the process, you're going to be strong, and you're going to like how you're feeling, or what you're working on at the end of it. So to answer your question, yes, I can feel that critic come in even when I'm in flow. And I'm also saying to him, I got it. I understand. This isn't what I want it to be right now, but I'm going to put it down and I'm going to move forward. I'm going to keep moving forward, and I'll double back and I'll see what you're complaining about, critic, later. But right now we're going to keep jamming up this mountain, you know?
I've heard Jerry Seinfeld, for example, say that his goal is to write every single day. He gets an old-fashioned calendar, and every day that he writes for a couple hours, he puts an X on that day. And that signifies that he lived up to his commitment to write every day and create every day. And he said something interesting about it. He said that once I'm done with my 1 or 2 hours, my reward for putting in that 1 or 2 hours is that I don't come back to what I wrote until the next day.
Yeah. I love
and
that.
And in his mindset, that is enabling him that reward for putting in the work. And, you know, when he comes back to it the next day, he starts to work it a little bit. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think so too. You know, I think if you're talking about a rough day, you know, whatever you're doing, whatever your job is, you know, if you're talking about a rough day, and you know, if you get to the end of that day, understanding that, you know, nobody can take that day away. You know, nobody can take Seinfeld's X off that calendar away. Nobody can do it. It might, you know, he maybe didn't come up with a good bit that day. I don't know, but that X matters. You know what I mean? And so that's what I pull from that anecdote, is that the X matters, and as long as you're making those small steps, you know, creatively, or whatever you're doing, you know, creatively for me, or small steps toward the end of a project that I'm pushing to finish, or small steps towards an idea that's slowly forming in my head, as long as I can do that, it might not be great, but it is a reward when I put that X on that day. And it does release, in many ways, I think, you know, the shackles of that critic, right? When you can say, you can't touch me on yesterday. That X is over, right? I got through that X. You know, critic, you can say that X maybe wasn't as good as it could be, but I'm on to the next day, and I'm going to push through this next day. I, you know, in a way, I think, you know, moving forward and not sort of stopping and being critical of yourself in the moment, and certainly not being critical of what you did in the past, you know, the previous day, is so important, I think, to the process. You know, any process, I think, but it certainly is important to my process that I must always be moving forward. You know.
So we've talked about a lot of little things in your creative process, but from your mind to the big screen, there's a lot of other steps that come into play. For people who aren't too familiar with the entertainment industry and what it takes to make a movie, in a minute or two, try and take us through that process from, you know, when you have a somewhat finished product to getting it onto the big screen in a movie theater.
Well, you know, it is a incredibly it seems to be an incredibly inefficient process of getting a movie to be made, and you know, it's very difficult. You're right; it involves, you know, a lot of people. In many ways, you know, really, writers are the beginning of a process that can take many years. You could take 10, 15, 20 years for projects to get made into a movie, if they ever do, you know. And in many ways, writers are the first step along that process. It really, and I've been lucky to have, you know, a few movies made, and so I've been lucky enough to live through that process and learn from that process. And it does, you know, in terms of a creative process, it is an extremely, collaborative effort at best. The strange thing is that there are all these collaborators. You have a writer, you have producers, you have a writer, you have a director, you have actors that come in to sort of bring the thing alive, and then you have all the technicians that go into making a movie, the cinematographers, editors, sound department, all of these things, and then beyond, At only one stage really are a majority of those collaborators together, and for a very short time, and it's during the production of a movie, you know what I mean? So at that point you have a director and you have your actors and you have your crew together and they're working as a team collaboratively. Before that, there's a whole host of people who have worked hard to get to that point, and they haven't necessarily worked together in the same room. And many of them haven't even known one another in this process. So, in the aggregate, it's this very interesting thing where there's numerous collaborators. Sometimes you don't necessarily know or work directly with your collaborators, but you're handing this project off to each other, and you're wanting to do your part of this process in a way that hopefully supports the next person. You know what I mean? So I want to try and write a screenplay that I am not only proud of, but that conveys the story that I want to tell, or that the producers and I want to tell, to the director, and I want to do that in a way that's supportive for him or her, and also then for the actors, so that when they read that screenplay, I'm helpful to their process, hopefully, in a way. So it's this incredibly tenuous sort of handoff, really, from one creative person to another. It sort of feels like, it's just like right now I'm the visual in my head is you're sort of building this incredibly delicate, sculpture that at any moment could just sort of shatter into 10,000 pieces, and when you get it how you like it, and hopefully it's as sturdy and as sort of solid as it can be, you hand it over to the next person and you hope that they understand what it is, and they too are going to sort of build it. So it's this, I'm maybe being a little too sort of figurative about the process, but it is a lot of people working together on one thing over a span of years, and to keep that project focused and potent and good is a very difficult thing. You rely on one another through the whole process.
Jason, you've achieved extraordinary success in your career, but there's so much more to come. As you think about your strengths, your weaknesses, things that you want to focus on and continue to grow professionally in, what are like one or two of your areas of growth that you're still focused on?
That's a great question. I really am super humbled by the process of writing. I think the more I write, and I've been a professional writer for over 20 years now, the more I write, the more I am humbled by how it works and how it works in my life. You know what I mean? I get better and better at craft. You know what I mean? That's a thing that I think I'm able to rely on my skill, the skill that I learned, that anybody can learn. I'm able to rely on my skill and my training more and more and more, each year that I write. But I am continually humbled by how a project comes together, and if a project moves sort of up the ladder, how it stays together, and how it becomes better and better along the way. I think one of the things that I work on all the time is to continually be excited about what I do, and to challenge myself about what I'm trying to do. I mean, I really look for projects that scare me. I look for projects that I think possibly I'm not good enough to do this. You know what I mean? I don't know that I'm good enough to write this, or there's probably somebody out there that is better at this kind of thing than me. I look for those things. It's oftentimes the ones that I sort of read, and an article I read or a book I read or an idea I have, and I say, oh man, that is really that's a really cool article. Oh, that's for somebody else. I can't. Those are the ones that if I really am hold my own feet to the fire, I say, that's one you should look at. So I'm always trying to do that, and I think I'm getting better and better at that. I'm getting better and better at challenging myself. And the other thing too that I'm constantly working on is I have started to, in the last few years, I've started to collaborate with other writers. For 15 plus years, I worked alone. I mean, I had an office that I went to, 10 hours a day, and I was the sole creator of the things I was writing and working on, and I just lived in a bubble, really, in many ways. And in the last few years, I've started to reach out to other writers I admire and other creators and share in the process. And that, for me, I wasn't scared of that. I was actually eager to do that. And I knew that I would be a good collaborator with others because I enjoy writers and I enjoy the process so much. But that's the thing that I'm wanting to do more and more of. I'm wanting to work with others at a development stage more and more. And so that's one of the other things that I'm pushing myself to do more.
Those are two important messages, I think, to end on here that can inspire anybody, right? I mean, first, pursue projects and things that scare you a little bit and will make you uncomfortable, because that's when you grow, and then collaborate and be open to drawing the circle wide and bringing others under the tent with you. And you never know what's possible when you do those two things. Jason, I have had so much fun. This has been an absolute masterclass on the creative process. And I know, regardless of what anybody listening is doing for a living or plans to do in their life, they will learn something from this conversation. So thank you for pulling the tarp, and we'll have to do this again sometime. All right. Take care, Jason.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.